We're going to first hear about Grady Springer. Grady, unfortunately, is not able to join us live today. He is taking a much earned and welcomed break. And so we'll be trying to join us live on his phone for the question and answer session. Grady, as I said, is a senior environmental scientist with Alabama Department of Environmental Management, where he serves as the emergency response coordinator and state on-scene coordinator. He has been with ADEM since 2003 and has responded to the state for many spills events, including Hurricane Katrina, Deepwater Horizon, the April 2011 tornado outbreak for those Alabamians that remember that, and the Pickens County Bakken crude oil train derailment, which he's going to be talking a little bit about today. To keep himself busy during the COVID lockdown, he's been working an awful bit and has earned some much needed salt therapy. So he's going to be spending the next few days down on Alabama's Gulf Coast doing some offshore fishing. So Tara, you're welcome to go ahead and play his video.
Thank you. It's good to be with everyone today. I hope everyone is doing well out there. Again, my name is Grady Springer. I'm with the Alabama Department of Environmental Management and currently serve as the Emergency Response Coordinator in the Montgomery branch. I've been with ADEM since 2003. In 2006, I began working within our Emergency Response branch. And in 2011, shortly after I rolled out of Deepwater Horizon response, I stepped into the Emergency Response Coordinator role. So what we want to do today is just kind of give you an overview of how the state and how ADEM responds to impacts of water of the state or surface waters. So this is essentially our setup. We do have 5 different divisions. Field operations is where our emergency response branch is housed at. And basically field operations are the guys that go out into the field, just as it says. We're the data collectors, the water samplers, air samplers, and again, our emergency response branch. So this is how we are set up to respond throughout the state. Our main branch is in Montgomery, Alabama, but we do have 4 field offices throughout the state from top to bottom. Of course, that being Decatur, Birmingham, Montgomery, and Mobile. Each one of these field offices has an emergency response function, and each one is responsible for a particular area of the state. So as you can see, wherever that spill occurs, that's going to be the field office coordinating that response. So when we're talking about what designates ADEM as the authority for response to hazardous materials, petroleum, or oil, well, the state of Alabama operates on an emergency operations plan. And within that plan, ESF 10, or Emergency Support Function 10, designates ADEM as the lead state agency in response to spills or potential spills of oil, petroleum, or hazardous materials. Essentially, what we are tasked to do is respond to any spill, ensure that it is properly managed and remediated, make sure that the proper steps are being taken to try to get the environment that's been impacted back to as close a pre-spill state as possible. We want to provide support to the local government, to the first responders, and we're there to provide some technical assistance at the local level, some oversight. We are not necessarily the ones that go in and actually physically do the work for the cleanup. We are there to provide that assistance. We also want to be a liaison between the local and the federal level. A lot of times, particularly on sizable spills, we will work very closely with US EPA and the US Coast Guard. So what we want to do is kind of bridge that gap between the local level and the federal level. ER staff is on call 24/7 every day of the year. We are on call all state holidays, and we have worked all state holidays. So if our phone rings, we do go to work. So we start talking about impacts to waters of the state. What is reportable? So in Alabama, we basically use the federal guidelines, and that states simply that any impacts of any amount to a water of the state is reportable. Any impacts to petroleum or oil should be reported. When we start talking about hazardous materials, really, per the Clean Water Act, it's no different. I know hazardous materials each have their own reporting quantity and individual to each chemical itself, but when it enters that waterway, we do ask that it is reported, so a response can be geared up if necessary. And we start looking at how do waters of the state, how do state waters become impacted? Well, really more times than not, this is the way they're going to receive material in them, either in petroleum or hazardous materials. And this is what it kind of looks like. A lot of times people will kind of assume that maybe commercial river traffic and barge traffic is going to be our largest avenue for impacts to waters of the state, but that's not really the case. We are very blessed in Alabama to have a lot of water, a lot of waterways, a lot of little intermittent creeks and streams that lead to bigger waterways. And when you're blessed to have that much water, it's also a very high potential for impacts to that water. So if we have a tractor trailer carrying 6,000 gallons of gasoline turned over on the side of the road or the interstate, probably going to be a storm drain somewhere that's going to lead to a creek. We have overturned liquid asphalt trucks, same deal. There's going to be a ditch somewhere. And then we have a lot of railways coming through. A lot of those are crossing through wetlands, through rivers. And anytime you have a derailment, that's generally going to lead to, again, you're talking about a locomotive and rail cars. Those are carrying generally large amounts of material. So when that much material is released, you're going to probably end up having it in a waterway somewhere. So that potential is always there. So we'll look real quickly at some previous rather large spills we've had that impacted Alabama waters. Some may remember in 2013, we had a crude oil train derailment in Aliceville, Alabama. This was in Pickens County. Essentially, we just had it was a train that was carrying a load of Bakken crude oil is what it was. Had 90 cars on it, was coming across a wetland and across a bridge trestle. The bridge basically gave way under it and shifted. 26 of those 90 cars carrying oil derailed and punctured and basically began releasing crude oil into this wetland. Also, a very large fire ensued with this release, just due to the fact that Bakken crude oil is a very light and very volatile crude oil, so there was a lot of flammability there. So we had this impact to this very large swampy wetland area. There are creek systems that flow into and out of this wetland. So when we have an incident like this, really what we want to do first and foremost is try to limit the spread of that material, limit the spread of the oil in this case. We wanted to try to protect the creek and water systems outside of that wetland. So that was always, that's always going to be the first priority. And in this case, we were actually able to do that. We were able to get there and kind of contain everything to the wetland and just focus on remediating the wetland and instead of having to also address the creeks outside of the wetland area. This is just a before and after aerial shot of what that derailment looked like. On the left, you can see obviously a lot of oil in that wetland. This was actually 2 days after the derailment occurred and the fires kind of subsided. And then you look on the right, and this was about a month after the derailment. And you can see here, the majority of the oil has been removed from the wetland at this point. You can see some boom in place, some structure in place that we use to, contain the oil, try to keep it out of the creek systems. And you can't really tell, but at the top and the bottom of this picture of the wetlands, there is a creek flowing in and out of it. So that's really where we want to try to put those preventative maintenance and measures in place. Now looking at another one, some people may be familiar with, this was a Colonial Pipeline spill. This occurred in September of 2016. And essentially what we had here is a very robust pipeline is running through Alabama. This pipeline basically cuts through the state and runs up the eastern coast. What happened here, this pipeline had a rupture to the pipe itself that was actually subsurface or under soil. And I know this is not the best map, but I'm gonna try to explain this a little bit. So right here, this is the pipeline. This is where the rupture occurred. And this little orange trail, basically what happened is this gasoline started leaching out of the soil and ended up in what is an old mining pond right here. There were 2 mining ponds where it says 2 and 3, and it ended up in this very first pond. And this pond actually spills over into what you see here is Peel Creek. And Peel Creek runs about 2 miles into the Cahaba River. So those not familiar with the Cahaba River, this is actually a very pristine water body in the state of Alabama, very biologically diverse. If you're not familiar with Cahaba River, you may want to look it up. It's home to more than 131 species of freshwater fishes, 18 of which have been found in no other river system. 40 species of mussels, 35 species of snails, and of all the aquatic life in the Cahaba River, 69 of those are on the endangered list, endangered species list. So obviously, in this case, we really want to look at protecting something like the Cahaba River. You know, having any type of material flowing in that would be very devastating for that river system. So, you know, we want to protect those, and in this case, that's was our goal, was to try to keep all of this gasoline basically contained to just this pond and out of the river system. We were actually able to do this through a very robust response to this spill. Had a lot of help from the federal level all the way down to the local level. US EPA came in and brought their assets. We were able to keep all this gasoline contained to just this pond. We did that with a very good response and also some luck. And I say luck because during this time frame, 2016 in Alabama, in August and September, really in October of 2016, Alabama was under a pretty severe drought. We had a lot of waterways that were drying up. A lot of the lakes were very low. And so generally you don't think about a drought as being a good thing, particularly for waters of the state, but in the case, it was very beneficial. During this response, we did not record a single day with any really measurable rain. How that helped us is no incoming rain, no water flowing into the pond that was impacted, and of course water levels did not raise and spill over into Pill Creek. So that was very fortunate for us in this situation. This is just a look at the impacted pond. The pond on the top is the pond that has gasoline in. You can see the red tint. This is essentially what a pond full of gasoline looks like. The pond on the bottom is an unimpacted. This is pond, on the map it said pond 3, that's pond 3. So you kind of see the difference in the two. And this is just another shot of that pond. This was basically taken, I think, a day and a half after we were first notified of the release itself. Then the picture on the right, kind of in the corner, this was about 2 weeks into the response, and we had removed the majority of the gasoline from the pond at this point. What you see there is kind of some residual, and some of it was a little bit emulsified, but basically at this point had it contained to 1/3 of the pond, and we were continuing to remove that. As I said, we were very fortunate to keep it to just this pond, never migrated outside of that into the creek system. And then we're going to talk about real quick spills of non-hazardous materials. You know, a lot of times people think when a spill occurs into a waterway, you classify it in one of two ways, either as an oil or petroleum or a hazardous material if it's going to do some damage, but that's not always the case. Sometimes we do have to deal with things that really don't fall into either one of those categories. And what you see here, this is essentially a truck was traveling down the interstate, ran off the road and struck a bridge pylon. It was a fully loaded truck, and when it hit this pylon, it basically lost its entire load across the interstate, and particularly concentrated in the median here. And as you will find with a lot of medians in the state, there was a storm drain right there in the center where most of that stuff is sitting. This particular truck was happened to be carrying, it was hauling for the ABC board in Alabama, was fully loaded with various alcohol. Now, I can tell you that majority of the cargo it was hauling ended up busted across, again, the interstate and in the median. And when you start talking about alcohol, while it's not necessarily classified as a hazardous material, you have that volume entering a waterway, it can obviously do a lot of damage, particularly dropping the DOs, causing fish kills, and killing some of the aquatic life. So even though it's not classified as a hazardous material, we still want to go out and respond to it and try to keep it out of the waterways as much as we can. So we start looking at what do we do when we have impacts to the surface water or waters of the state. One of the first things we want to do is we want to look at that body of water that's been impacted, and we want to begin looking downstream. What are going to be some of the things impacted? Do we have any drinking water intakes along that system that feed municipalities? Do we have any critical habitat, any environmentally sensitive habitat? We want to know where that is, and we want to know exactly what we really need to focus on protecting first and foremost. Once we've identified that, the sensitive structures there, we want to try to protect that and then contain the spill as much as possible. So if we can't contain that spill to a smaller area, that's going to be our focus, to limit the migration of the material. We also begin to make notifications. ADM-ER begins to make notifications to different entities. One of the first ones we're going to call is our ADM Water Division, specifically our drinking water branch. We are immediately in touch with them, explain to them, hey, this is ADEM-ER. We're on a spill to a particular water body. This is a material that's been spilled, and this is where it's headed. Can you look downstream and tell us what it is that's going to be impacted? Can you begin looking to see if there are some municipalities that have any water intakes that may be impacted by this material? At that point, the drinking water branch is going to start looking downstream. They will begin then notifying any local water municipalities that may be impacted by the material. They will be in touch with them, say, hey, we've had a spill. This is a material that's been spilled. This is what's coming your way. The spill is at so-and-so location, and it's about 4 miles upstream of your water intake. You want to maybe begin protecting your water intake, however you do that, whether you take it offline or boom it off, but whatever you have to do to protect that infrastructure, and also thus protecting the water for our community. That's what we want to do. We also make sure that the local level is involved, the county emergency management agency. We want to make sure that they are fully spooled up and understand what's happening in their community. We don't want to operate outside of their awareness because we want them to be part of that response as well. We are in touch with the National Response Center if the responsible party has not already made that report to the NRC. And then, of course, we will be in touch with EPA and the U.S. Coast Guard if applicable. If it's a sizable spill that we understand is going to need some assistance, we'll be in touch with one of those two entities. And so we start looking at, we've had a spill into a water body, so who is responsible for that remediation of the spill? Who's responsible to get the assets there? And in the state of Alabama, we immediately began looking at the responsible party, the person who owned the material and was basically a liability for the spill. We asked them to fully become enrolled in the response. We looked at them to get the necessary assets on scene to control and remediate the response. And then we looked to work very closely with the responsible party to, again, ensure that everything is being responded to as it should be. In the event that the responsible party is unable or unwilling to respond, at that point, we will be in touch again at the federal level with EPA or the U.S. Coast Guard, depending on what water body and what type of water body that spill takes place. At this point, we look to them to kind of bring in a funding mechanism, whether that be through PERFA or LGR or Oil Spill Liability Trust Fund, whatever means they have that they can open up to help the state respond to the spill. I will tell you, in the state of Alabama, we do have one challenge, particularly at ADEM, and that is when it comes to spills to waters of the state, or really spills of any to anywhere, we don't have an emergency response fund mechanism. So what that means is if I have a spill somewhere and the responsible party is unwilling or unable to respond to it and do what they need to do, then I don't have a source fund within ADEM that I can go to open up and get a contractor out there on behalf of the state. So that's why we have to turn to our federal partners and look to them to kind of come in and help us with this. So again, this is just our structure, and while field operations is obviously a separate division than land, water, and air divisions, we still do work closely with them, particularly in the event of a spill, and particularly in the event of a spill to a waterway. So kind of what that looks like is, for those of you familiar with America's Water Infrastructure Act that passed in October of 2018. And essentially what that did was it amended EPCRA, the Emergency Planning and Community Right to Know Act, sections 304 and 312. So what does that mean? Essentially what that says is that if a responsible party has a spill, they are now by law must make a notification to the State Emergency Response Commission, or in this case, the Alabama Emergency Response Commission. The ARC will then notify the state's water primacy that the spill has occurred and give them the pertinent details, the chemical and where the spill has occurred at, what water body has been impacted, what possible source drinking water has been impacted. The state's water primacy will then begin making a notification out to the different municipalities that may be impacted along this waterway, whether it be through drinking water intakes or whatever. And obviously this is not just to preserve the river system and the environment itself, but also to preserve that very valuable drinking water to a community. We don't obviously ever want to lose a community's ability to provide drinking water due to a spill. Well, in the state of Alabama, we were actually ahead of this curve, so it was fortunate for us. We already really had this mechanism in place when this act was passed in 2018. So what does that kind of mean? It means that in Alabama, the ARC, or the Alabama Emergency Response Commission, is co-chaired by the Alabama Emergency Management Agency and also by ADEM. And I, in fact, am the co-chair for the CERC in Alabama. So when that responsible party makes a notification to ADEM in Alabama, they are essentially fulfilling that notification to the AERC, since we are the co-chair. In Alabama, ADEM is also the drinking water primacy for the state. So once ADEM ER has been notified, I then turn again, as I stated a minute ago, to our drinking water branch and make the notification to them that this water body's been impacted. You need to begin making your notifications and looking downstream and see what that looks like. So that fulfills the second part of that notification to the water primacy. And then again, we begin making those notifications to the municipalities and letting them know what has occurred and to do what they need to do to protect their infrastructure. And that fulfills kind of this America's Water Infrastructure Act in Alabama. Like I said, fortunately, we already had this in place, so it really was not a change to us so much. We kind of were used to doing this. That's just kind of a basic overview of how we respond to spills in state waters, kind of what that looks like. Every spill is different, and you kind of have to just run each response according to how that spill is and what it looks like and what you're dealing with. But other than that, if there are any questions, I'll be glad to take them during the panel discussion coming up shortly. Thank you.